sun rises over Ouagadougou, painting the sky in soft gold. Dust floats lazily through the warm morning air as children race across a schoolyard, their laughter echoing like tiny bells of hope. Backpacks bounce. Shoes slap against cracked earth. The day feels alive, full of promise. But in the quiet corner of that same yard, beneath a tired old acacia tree whose leaves have long forgotten what shade truly means, lies a child the world has stopped seeing. A little girl, curled up on a worn wooden bench, as small and fragile as a wilted flower trying to survive in the desert. Her dress is torn, her tiny feet are bare and bruised, and wrapped tightly in her arms, as if it were the last thing keeping her connected to life itself, is a faded school bag. To everyone else, it is just an old bag. But to her, it is everything. And on this very morning, walking through that schoolyard on what should have been a routine visit, is Ibrahim Traoré, a young president, a soldier, a man who has stood face to face with pressure, power, and danger. But nothing he has ever faced prepared him for this. His bodyguards urge him forward. Schedules, cameras, speeches, a nation waiting. Yet, Ibrahim stops. His eyes have found the small figure on the bench. Silence grips the air. His jaw tightens. His heart aches in his chest, not as a president, but as a human being. Because real leadership is not tested in speeches or parades. It is tested in moments like this. Would he walk past like so many others did? Would he hand the problem to someone else and move on? Or would he choose compassion, even if it slows him down, even if it changes everything? Stay with me, because what happens next will stay in your heart long after this story ends. This is not just about a leader and a child. This is about humanity, about what happens when power kneels beside pain. Ibrahim had come to the school to speak about education, about dreams, opportunity, and the future of the children of Burkina Faso. But as he stands in front of that small bench, all those speeches feel empty, because before him lies Amina, a child who has slept on that bench, not for an hour, not for a night, but for 3 long days. 3 days of being unseen. 3 days of children walking past. 3 days of teachers pretending not to notice. 3 days of adults whispering, avoiding, moving on, until caring became inconvenient. Her story is written across her tiny body. Her feet, cracked, dusty, wounded. Her hands, trembling even in sleep. Her face, carrying a lifetime of exhaustion in just 8 years. Even her dreams don't look peaceful. Ibrahim slowly kneels beside her, a president lowering himself to the level of a child the world forgot. His security team stiffens. The school principal rushes forward with nervous apologies. Excuses float in the air. But Ibrahim is no longer listening, because his eyes have fallen on her school bag. He gently opens it and finds almost nothing inside. A broken pencil, a nearly finished notebook, and one single photograph. A smiling woman holding a baby. On the back, in shaky handwriting, Mama and Amina, 2016. His hand trembles. Where is the mother now? What storm tore this little life apart? How could a nation fail a child so completely? An advisor whispers, "Sir, the press is waiting. We should move." But Ibrahim turns, and his eyes burn not with anger, but with compassion so fierce it cannot be ignored. "I am the authority," he says softly, "and this child has been failed by every system meant to protect her." The schoolyard falls silent. Children stare from classroom windows. Teachers gather in doorways. Even the wind seems to stop. And then something happens. On that bench, the little girl's body shivers. Not from cold, but from hunger and exhaustion so deep her body no longer fights it. Her breathing is shallow, uneven, fragile. And as Ibrahim watches over her like a guardian, Amina's eyes slowly begin to open. Her world, full of pain and abandonment, is about to collide with his, and nothing will ever be the same again. What will she see when her eyes truly open? Fear? Another stranger walking away? Or the first glimpse of hope she has had in years? Her eyes open slowly, like a fragile door hesitating to let the world in. They were the most beautiful brown eyes Ibrahim had ever seen. not because they sparkled with joy, but because they were heavy with stories no child should ever have to carry. Fear lived there. Silence lived there. Memories lived there. Memories of being forgotten. She looked up at him. This tall man in a military uniform, surrounded by guards with hard faces and watchful eyes. Instinct flickered inside her like a tiny flame. Run. Hide. Protect yourself. But she couldn't run. Her body wouldn't let her. Even sitting up felt like climbing a mountain. Ibrahim softened his voice and switched to her local language. Hey, it's okay, he whispered. You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you. For a moment, Amina simply stared at him, searching his face for truth, for kindness, for any reason to trust him. Then he asked the question that cut straight through her fragile heart. Are you hungry? Her chin trembled. She gave the smallest nod, and a single tear escaped. Just one. As if even crying required more strength than she had left. Ibrahim stood slowly, and the expression on his face made even trained soldiers take a step back. But no one expected what he would do next. He removed his presidential jacket, the symbol of authority, power, and command, and wrapped it around Amina's shaking shoulders. In that moment, uniforms, titles, politics, and power disappeared. There was only a man and a child in pain. No cameras, no reporters, no applause, just compassion, raw and unfiltered. Bring food, he said calmly, and water, quickly. Guards rushed into motion. But Ibrahim knew this wasn't just about hunger. This wasn't just about thirst. This was about a system that had broken, and the child who had slipped through the cracks. His advisor approached carefully. Sir, we should contact child services. They're trained to handle these. Ibrahim turned sharply. Child services? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried power. The same child services that ignored calls for 3 days? The same system that leaves children like her invisible. The advisor swallowed. With respect, you cannot personally rescue every hungry child in Burkina Faso. You have a country to run. Ibrahim didn't hesitate. Then maybe running this country means I should. A ripple went through the crowd. Teachers whispered. Some nodded. Others stared in disbelief. An elderly teacher with gray hair stepped forward. Her voice trembled, not with disrespect, but with the painful weight of truth. Mr. President, if you help this one child, what about the others? We have students here who arrive hungry every single day. Children without uniforms. Families who cannot afford the smallest fees. The problem is so much bigger than her. The schoolyard fell silent. It was the kind of question that pierces the heart of leadership. Ibrahim looked at the woman, then at Amina, so small, wrapped in a jacket far too big for her. Her hands still trembling, her eyes still watching him, afraid he might leave. You're right, he said softly. This problem is bigger than one child. It is the result of corruption, of systems that failed, of a world that exploits the vulnerable and leaves our children with nothing. But this child is not a problem. She is a person. And right now, I have the power to see her, to help her, to refuse to walk away like so many others have. He paused. And if I cannot act when a child suffers in front of me, then what is the meaning of all my speeches about change? A bodyguard returned with bread, fruit, and a bottle of clean water. Ibrahim took the bottle and offered it gently. Drink, slowly. Her small fingers shook as she lifted it. She drank desperately, as if each drop pulled her back from the edge of disappearance. Easy, Ibrahim said softly, guiding the bottle down for a moment. Too fast will make you sick. The crowd watched in silence, watching a president become a father to a child he had never met. And in that moment, Ibrahim made a decision that would echo across the nation. He stood and turned to his security chief. I want a full investigation, he said. I want every name, every agency, every unanswered call. And I want it by morning. Yes, sir. And I want a nationwide report on every school. I want numbers, faces, stories. No more invisible children. Not one more. But even that didn't feel like enough. Because right now, Amina still had nowhere to go. He looked back at her. This tiny life who had survived storms no child deserves, and something inside him hardened into resolve. From today forward, he said quietly, this child is under my protection. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The advisor leaned in urgently. Sir, this is highly irregular. Then let it be. His voice was steady, calm, unshakable. Burkina Faso cannot heal while our children sleep on benches. And I refuse to be the kind of leader who walks past suffering because protocol says to. He turned back to Amina, his jacket wrapped around her like a shield. Her breathing steadied. Her eyes softened. For the first time, there was a spark of something fragile. Hope. And as Ibrahim knelt beside her again, she whispered her first word since waking. Thank you. Barely audible. Barely there. But powerful enough to move mountains. He smiled gently. Rest now. You're safe. But even as he spoke those words, Ibrahim knew something else. This moment was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Because where there is one forgotten child, there are thousands more. And a leader who dares to see them must decide how far he is willing to go, and what he is willing to sacrifice. The wind shifted. The school fell silent. And somewhere deep inside, Ibrahim understood. This single act of compassion might change the destiny of a nation. But destiny always comes with a cost. And very soon, he would discover what that cost truly was. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are not fought on the battlefield. They are fought in the quiet places, where a child waits on a wooden bench for someone to finally see her. Ibrahim's voice carried across the schoolyard. Steady, controlled, but burning with a fire no one could miss. I want numbers, he said. I want to know how many children are hungry, how many sleep in unsafe places, how many have been abandoned by the systems created to protect them. His advisors exchanged uneasy glances, because they knew what this meant. This wasn't just compassion. This was accountability. This was truth, and truth has a way of exposing everything people prefer to keep hidden. Budgets, failures, corruption, neglect, and that terrified them. But Ibrahim wasn't finished. He rested his hand gently on Amina's head. And this child, he said quietly, is coming with me. Now. The crowd gasped as one. The principal froze. Even Ibrahim's most loyal security officers stared in shock. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't standard. This wasn't safe. Sir, his advisor whispered urgently, you can't simply take a child. There are legal procedures, custody verification, family checks. You may be accused of. Accused of what? Ibrahim turned, his voice sharp, not with anger, but with conviction. Accused of caring? Accused of acting when a child is in danger? Accused of refusing to let bureaucracy decide whether a child lives or dies. The air tightened. Phones appeared. Cameras rolled. Opinions began forming in real time. Some saw a hero. Some saw recklessness. But no one could look away. And then, in front of everyone, Ibrahim made his choice. He bent down, slow and careful, as if approaching a fragile bird. And with the tenderness of a father, he lifted Amina into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. A child, reduced to near weightlessness by hunger and sorrow. Her body stiffened at first, unsure how to receive kindness, unsure how to trust human touch. But then, maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the way Ibrahim held her. Not like a duty, but like a promise. She rested her head against his chest. And the schoolyard fell completely silent. Teachers stopped moving. Children pressed against windows. Security hesitated, unsure whether to clear a path or freeze time itself. Because this was not in any manual. Presidents don't carry sick children through dusty schoolyards. Leaders don't personally walk into suffering. But Ibrahim Traoré was not every leader. We're taking her to the hospital, he said, his voice firm. The best medical care in Ouagadougou. The best doctors. Whatever she needs, she gets. his security chief, a man who had followed him through war, uncertainty, and revolution, had never seen this expression before. It was determination, but deeper, more human. As Ibrahim began walking toward the vehicle, something extraordinary happened. The children started coming out, quietly, softly, like hope gathering courage, one by one, then in small groups, then in dozens. They didn't cheer, they didn't speak, they just watched, because for the first time, they were seeing something they were never taught to expect from power: compassion. A little boy, no older than 6, stepped forward and tugged gently at Ibrahim's sleeve. "Mr. President," he whispered, "will you come back for the rest of us too?" Ibrahim stopped. The question hung in the air like a prayer. He looked at the child, then at the sea of young faces now gathered around. Thin faces, worn shoes, torn uniforms stitched with love because there was no money for new ones. These were the forgotten children of Burkina Faso, the ones who carried dreams in empty stomachs. Ibrahim knelt, still holding Amina in one arm, and placed his free hand on the boy's shoulder. "I am working every single day to come back for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That is what our struggle is about. That's why we fight to reclaim what belongs to our people, so that children like you, like Amina, like every child in this nation, will have food, safety, and the chance to dream." The little boy didn't blink. "But that takes time," he said softly. And Amina didn't have time. Silence, the kind that breaks your heart. Ibrahim nodded. "You're right," he said softly. "And that is why, when time runs out for someone, we act. We help the one we can help. Right now. Because leadership isn't only about building the future. It's about protecting the present." An elderly cleaner, her back bent by years of sweeping dust others never noticed, stepped forward. Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. "Bless you, my son," she whispered. "Bless you for seeing the child the world stopped seeing." She hesitated. "I shared my lunch with her when I could, but I am just the cleaner." "What is your name?" "Fatima." "Fatima," he said gently. "You are not just anything. You did more than most people with far greater power. You protected her when you could. And today, I honor you for that." By now, the world beyond the schoolyard had begun to wake up. News vans rolled in. Reporters rushed to set up cameras. Social media flooded with shaky phone videos of the president cradling a starving child. But inside the vehicle, as Amina lay weak and wrapped in his jacket, the world became small again. She looked up at him with trembling lips. "Are you really the president?" He smiled, a real smile, warm, human. "Yes," he said softly. "But today, I am just a person who found another person who needed help." Her eyes filled. "My mama, she told me, good people still exist. Before she got sick. Before she couldn't finish. She didn't need to, because Ibrahim already knew. He had seen the photograph. He had felt the weight of that small school bag carrying memories instead of food. He placed his hand gently on her forehead. "Your mother was right," he whispered. "Good people still exist. And from today forward, you will meet many of them." The vehicle began to move. Children waved. Teachers watched in silence. And Fatima, the cleaner who had fed her in secret, wiped tears from her eyes with the corner of her scarf. Inside the car, Ibrahim looked once more at Amina. And he understood something with painful clarity. This was not charity. This was justice. Because no nation deserves to call itself strong, while its children sleep on benches. And this simple act of carrying a fragile child to safety was not the end. It was the beginning of a storm that would shake ministries, expose failures, and force a nation to answer one question: who are we if we cannot care for our children? And that storm was already on its way. And he knew that this moment, this simple act of picking up a suffering child, would ripple outward in ways he could not yet imagine. But what happened afterward would change everything. Within hours, the video began spreading across phones, across neighborhoods, across borders. Not the polished speeches, Not the official press releases, but the shaky cell phone footage of a president kneeling beside a frightened child, speaking with a trembling voice filled not with authority, but with kindness. By evening, Amina's story was everywhere. Across Africa, people sat watching in crowded living rooms, restaurants, and dusty roadside cafes. They weren't just seeing a leader, they were seeing a human being doing something deeply human. By the next morning, the story had crossed oceans. News channels debated it. Commentators argued. Some called Ibrahim a hero. Others accused him of theater, of strategy, of using tragedy for popularity. But while the world argued, Ibrahim did not log on to social media. He did not watch talk shows. He did not respond to criticism. He was sitting quietly in a hospital room, beside a small bed where Amina slept, finally safe, finally warm, finally receiving the medical care she so desperately needed. Machines hummed softly, nurses moved gently, and Ibrahim sat, thinking, not as a president, not as a soldier, but as a man. The doctor's report was devastating. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, infection, anemia, the kind of suffering that does not happen overnight, but over months, maybe years. If she had gone just a few more days without help, the doctor said softly, she might not have survived. Those words sank into his heart like stones. He stayed long after the officials left, long after the cameras disappeared, long after the hospital hallways had gone quiet. And in that silence, something inside him hardened, not with anger, but with resolve. The next morning, he called an emergency cabinet meeting. But this time, it was not about politics, not about security, not about trade. It was about children. I want a new ministry, he said, his voice firm. The Ministry of Child Protection and Welfare. And it will not exist only on paper. It will be funded. It will be staffed with people who care. And every school in our nation will have someone responsible for identifying children in crisis and acting. Some advisors hesitated. Sir, we cannot afford this. There are other priorities. But Ibrahim shook his head. If we can afford weapons, we can afford compassion. If we can afford officials, we can afford social workers. This is not charity. This is our duty. And that was the beginning. Over the next weeks, Amina recovered slowly. Her cheeks grew rounder. Her voice grew stronger. She laughed sometimes, a sound that felt like sunrise breaking through clouds. And something else began to happen across the nation. Teachers started reporting children in need. Neighborhoods began organizing food drives. Taxi drivers carried extra bread and fruit. Women in markets began quietly helping orphans. Students volunteered as tutors, because one act of compassion from a leader had given the entire country permission to care. 3 months later, Ibrahim returned to the school, this time officially. Cameras were there. Officials were there. Speeches were printed. Flags fluttered. But there was one part of the program Ibrahim insisted on. Amina would be there too. She arrived holding the hand of her foster mother, a kind woman carefully chosen and supported by the new ministry. Amina wore a clean uniform. Her hair was braided neatly, and while she was still small, still fragile, the fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by something that looked like hope. The moment she saw Ibrahim, she let go of her foster mother's hand and ran toward him. Without hesitation, he bent down and lifted her into his arms, and in that instant the titles disappeared. There was no president, no head of state, only a man and a child. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "Thank you for seeing me." His eyes filled with tears. "No," he whispered back. "Thank you for reminding me why I do this." The cameras captured the moment. The image spread, painted onto walls, printed in newspapers, shared across the world. People didn't see power. They saw humanity. And in his speech that day, Ibrahim said something the world would repeat for years. True strength is not measured by how many enemies you defeat, but by how many vulnerable people you protect. True leadership is not about how high you rise, but how many people you lift with you. Years later, Amina would grow into a strong, confident young woman. She would graduate with honors in social work and dedicate her life to protecting children. Children like the girl she once was. And when people asked her about that day on the school bench, she would smile softly and say, "He didn't just save my life. He taught me that one person's compassion can change everything." And that is why this story of Ibrahim Traoré would be remembered. Not because he was president, not because he led a revolution, but because when faced with suffering, he did not look away. He did not delegate. He did not say, "It is not my job." He chose kindness, and kindness changed a nation. So if this story touched your heart, share it. Because the world needs reminders that leadership without compassion is empty. But compassion, even from one person, can change everything. And maybe, just maybe, inspire others to do the same.